in the quiet hills of Montana where the cottonwoods whisper the same songs they did when we were young, there lived a woman named Clara May. She was born with a beauty that turned heads before she ever spoke a word. Folks said her eyes held the color of summer sky just after rain, and her smile could gentle a spooked colt. But beauty can be a heavy thing to carry when hearts are small. When Clara was barely 20, the town turned its back. Women crossed the street rather than walk beside her men to stared too long, then told their wives she was troubled. The young ones teased her without mercy, calling her proud and vain, though she never once lifted her chin. Sunday church grew quiet when she slipped into the back pew. Even the preacher seemed to hurry his sermon, so Clara learned to walk the back roads. She wore her mama's old sunbonnet pulled low and kept her gaze on the ground still. The whispers followed like dust behind a wagon. Years rolled on slow and lonely. Clara took work cleaning houses for those who would open their doors. She kept her voice soft and her hands busy as she never answered back, no matter what was said. By the time she reached 52, her hair had silver threads catching light like morning frost. The lines around her eyes told of too many nights wondering why kindness felt so far away. She rented a tiny place on the edge of town with one window facing west. Every evening she sat there watching the sun settle behind the mountains. She told herself the ache would ease one day. Some herds just take longer than others. Out on the Lazy J Ranch lived a man named Thomas Lee. Most called him Tom. He had been alone since his Mary passed 20 years earlier. Their only child lived clear across the country with little ones of her own. Tom kept busy with cattle and horses and the steady rhythm of honest work. His hands were rough, but his heart stayed tender. He remembered what it felt like to be judged for things you never chose. When he was young, he'd been wild, and folks never let him forget it. Time and sorrow had taught him that people mostly hurt because they're afraid. So Tom made a habit of looking past the outside and listening for the truth underneath. One October afternoon, the color of ripe wheat, Tom rode into town for supplies. His old gelding Dusty picked his way down the dusty street. As they passed the feed store, Tom noticed a small crowd near the fence. Voices were raised in that mean, teasing way folks sometimes fall into. He eased Dusty closer and saw Clara standing with her back against the rail. Two young cowboys, fresh from the saloon, were laughing loud. They had tied a rope loose around her wrists like it was some kind of joke. Said she was too pretty to be out walking alone. Said maybe she needed someone to keep her safe. Clara's face was pale, but she didn't cry or beg. She just looked at the ground and waited for it to be over that way. She had waited so many times before. Tom felt something rise up in him, quiet and steady, not anger. Exactly, more like the memory of his Mary telling him kindness is the only thing that ever mends a broken world. He swung down from Dusty, slow and easy. The young men turned, laughing, ready with another smart remark, but something in Tom's eyes stopped their words cold. He was 63 with shoulders still broad from years of hard work. His voice when he spoke was calm as creek water. Boys, you've had your fun, now cut her loose. They blustered a bit, but one look at Tom's steady gaze and they fumbled with the rope. Clara rubbed her wrists and murmured, "Thank you," without meeting his eyes. Tom tipped his hat, the way his daddy taught him. No need for thanks, ma'ams. Things just aren't right, and that's all there is to walk away. Then stopped. Something in the slope of her shoulders tugged at him. He turned back. "Miss Clara, would you walk with me a ways? I could use the company, and I reckon you could too." She hesitated, surprised anyone knew her name without spite behind it. Then she nodded once and fell into step beside him. They walked past the stores and the curious faces peering from windows. Neither one spoke until they reached the edge of town where the road turned toward the river. Tom cleared his throat. "I've seen you around 4 years, always walking alone, never seemed fair." Somehow Clara gave a small, tired smile. "Fair went out the door a long time ago, Tom. Some of us learn to live without." Eth nodded. "Slow maybe so, but a body shouldn't have tooth." They stood there a moment, listening to the cottonwoods rustle. Then Tom said something that surprised even himself. "My house is big and quiet, too quiet since Mary went home to glory. There's a spare room with its own door and a window facing the sunrise. You could stay as long as you need, no rent, no questions, just a place where nobody bothers you." Clara looked at him long and careful. She saw the lines life had carved around his eyes, saw the gentle way he held Dusty's rind shade, expecting charity. Mr. Littom shook his head. "Not charity, just to folks who know what lonesome feels like." Deciding not to be lonesome alone, she studied the ground a while. Then she lifted her eyes to Hecll. "Think on it." That was all she said. But the next morning she appeared at the ranch gate with a small cloth bag and her mama's quilt over her arm. Tom met her at the porch. He didn't smile too big or make a fuss. He simply took the bag and said, "I made coffee. Come see a room when you're ready." The days began to change color, soft and slow. Clara took over the cooking because she liked it, and Tom's meals had been beans and biscuits for too many winters. She planted hollyhocks along the fence the way her mother used to. Tom built her a bench beneath the cottonwood so she could sit in the shade and watch the horses. Evenings found them on the porch swing, creaking gentle back and forth. They talked about small things at first, the way the sky looked different every night, how the coffee tasted better when somebody else poured it. Then the talk grew deeper, about dreams that never came true, about love that slipped away quiet as morning mist, about learning to carry grief without letting it make you mean one. Sunday Tom hitched the team to the old wagon. He asked Clara if she'd like to Ride out to the north pasture, said. The wildflowers were thick this year, and the light was pretty. She put on her Sunday dress, the blue one she hadn't worn since her mama's funeral. They spread a quilt under a lone cottonwood and ate cold chicken. And cornbread. Bees hummed lazy in the clover far off. The cattle called soft to one another. Clara leaned back against the tree and closed her eyes for the first time in years. She wasn't waiting for someone to hurt her, she was just breathing. Tom watched her face soften in the sunlight. He spoke quietly. No, I never much believed in second chances. Figured life gave you one hand and you played it best you could. But sitting here, I'm thinking maybe the Lord keeps a few cards up his sleeve for folks who've had it rough. Clara opened her eyes and smiled real and slow. Maybe he does, Tom. Maybe he does, Tom. Maybe he does. Winter came early that year. Snow settled soft over the hills like a quilt tucked around sleeping children. Clara and Tom kept the stove fed with cottonwood and pine. They strung popcorn by lamplight and laughed when it broke and scattered across the floor. On Christmas Eve, they sat close to the fire outside. The wind moaned gentle around the eaves. Tom reached into his pocket and drew out a small box wrapped in brown paper. He set it in her hand without ceremony. Found this in town, reminded me of someone. Inside was a silver locket, simple and old-fashioned. In the front was etched a tiny wild rose. Clara opened it and saw 2 empty spaces waiting for pictures. Her eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. She pressed it to her hot tit. The prettiest thing anyone ever gave me. Tom looked into the fire. Mary always said beauty ought to be cherished, not feared. I reckon she was right. Spring returned with meadowlarks and warm wind. The hollyhocks grew tall along the fence. One evening after supper, Tom found Clara on the porch swing. She was holding the locket and staring at the mountains turning purple in the sunset. He sat beside her and took her hand. It was rough from years of work, but warm and steady. Clara, may I'm not much for pretty words, but I'd be honored if you'd stay here always, not as a guest, as family, as the person who makes this house feel like home again. She turned to him and the years fell away from her face. She looked young and old all at once, like someone who had finally been handed the missing piece of her heart. Thomas, Leave been waiting 50 years for someone to see me instead of what they thought I was. Seed like to grow old right here with you. They sat quiet while the first stars came out. No need for more words. Some things are understood in the spaces between heartbeats. Years passed, gentle as seasons. Should Clara's hair turned full silver and beautiful as moonlight on snow. Tom's steps slowed, but his smile stayed ready. They kept a bench beneath the cottonwood, patched and painted. Grandchildren from Tom's daughter came to visit, filling the house with running feet and laughter. Clara taught the girls to plant flowers and the boys to gentle a horse with quiet hands. She told them stories about a time when she walked alone and how one good man with a kind heart changed everything. On quiet evenings, they still sat on the porch swing, hands clasped, easy as breathing. They spoke of Mary and thanked her for teaching Tom how to love. Sometimes they just listened to the night settle soft around them. Clara would touch the locket at her throat and smile. Inside were 2 tiny pictures, one of a young woman with some eyes, one of an old cowboy with gentle laugh lines, proof that beauty finally found a home and kindness wrote the ending. After all, when folks in town tell the story now, they speak different. They say Clara May wasn't too beautiful for this world, was just waiting for the part of the world that was ready for her. And Tom Lee wasn't looking for anything when he rode in that day except maybe a chance to be the man his Mary always believed he could be. And on warm evenings when the cottonwoods